This is a very pivotal discussion, not only domestically in the United States, but this is a discussion that's being held internationally. So as Dr. Monaghan said, I'm based in Sarajevo, Bosnia and Herzegovina. And it's very interesting that I've come across people in the street, or even, friends of mine, or people, even I was buying cherries the other day, and one of the cashiers asked me, what's happening in America? It's not good, right? So America is on notice, right? And for a variety of reasons. For a long time, we've kind of played the role of international cop. We've played the role of arbiter in terms of human rights, and also tried to maintain this kind of moral hegemony in terms of human rights and democracy. Now, with the killing of not George Floyd, but not just the killing of George Floyd, but a string of racialized incidents this year and over the past several years has kind of culminated to this one particular event in our national history and global history. The extrajudicial killing on camera sent shockwaves across the country and around the world. So the sight of U.S. and to follow, the sight of U.S. police and security forces heckling protesters, using tear gas, beating up protesters. This is something that was viewed across the world. And unfortunately, this became fodder for America's adversaries, right? So we've seen reports and concerns issued from Iran, Russia, China, things that countries that we would particularly not consider bastions or beacons for human rights, right? These are countries that the United States itself has considered to be adversaries in some way, shape, or form, and where we've given foreign assistance funding, particularly to counter the influence of Russia, China, and Iran throughout the world. So this becomes problematic in a way for many who are working overseas, American diplomats or aid workers, who are trying to work to develop international programs for human rights assistance or technical assistance. For instance, USAID gives something like $40 billion as part of our national budget. And part of that money actually goes for technical assistance to develop societies and political institutions so that there's absence of conflict. So this is particularly important. We're giving money, and we have these things that are, happening within our own society. So one particular aspect I want to mention is we have this idea of American exceptionalism, and American exceptionalism, in my opinion, is twofold. So in one fold, American exceptionalism is that we're very different. Our political history, our experience make us unique than any other society in the world, which is true in many regards, right? It was Michelle Obama who said, "I wake up every day in a house that slaves built," right? So that's an amazing juxtaposition, that her husband being president. On the other side, there is this aspect to where we see things that are so far away, and we don't think these things can happen in America, like ethnic conflict. When I used to teach a class on ethnic conflict, I would always try to remind my students, ethnic conflict isn't something that's far away, that happened in Bosnia in the 90s, or that happens in Yemen, or happens in Africa, right? Ethnic conflict happens in America every day. And there are various examples that we can draw on to posit this. So this idea is that I would argue America is this post-conflict society that still has a long ways to go in terms of addressing major human rights concerns in terms of racialized policing. So one thing that we often don't hear in discourse in the media is human rights. And a key part of that is the United States does have human rights obligations that we must live up to, that we've acceded to through international covenants and agreements. So on the other side, when we talk about American exceptionalism, there's this idea that, okay, the rules don't apply to us, right? So this is one of the other key aspects that continue to happen. The United States has been very, 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 very much involved in developing key international instruments for human rights, right? Even the basic UN Charter was something that we know was supported by Eleanor Roosevelt, right? The very founding of the UN was something that was supported by the United States, and the United States funds a large portion of the United Nations and other key international institutions. So there continues to be this discussion as, well, where do we stand, and as far as human rights, and why isn't there this applicability for the United States? So one of the key things that continues to happen and that's important is that as we continue to have these incidences, this blemishes and tarnishes our can we ever say that we had a moral standing in terms of human rights? But the work that we've done, it has been important. We have worked to transform societies across the world and address human rights violations. If the United States, for instance, the State Department releases a human rights report every year of regimes and human rights abusers. Some of the two key aspects that are used in diplomatic practices, such as naming and shaming and sanctions. The United States has done this, right? So, for instance, we've sanctioned before Aung San Suu Kyi, we sanctioned the regime in Myanmar, right? The junta before Myanmar supposedly transformed into a democratic society. We sanctioned key military leaders who were part of the repressive regime. So we have examples of this throughout recent history. Additionally, the United States, we made the premise on the invasion of Iraq, the Bush administration did, on furthering democracy and human rights. So as we continue to have these issues domestically, this blemishes and tarnishes the work that so many are working abroad overseas. And one important aspect is there are people who know and understand this at all levels of the U.S. government. I think it's important to point that out. Additionally, what's another kind of measure to roll back? So 2 years ago, the United States removed itself from the United Nations Human Rights Council. The United States Human Rights Council is the kind of key body that holds states accountable internationally for human rights violations and maintaining a human rights record that falls in line with international standards and law. So the Trump administration essentially asserted that due to the number of human rights violators that sit on the council and the fact that the council continues to address Israel's record when it comes to Gaza and the West Bank, the Trump administration has decided to remove the United States from the Human Rights Council, which brought backlash from across the world, of course, right? So today, if we continue to look now, the Human Rights Council has been very much involved in this discussion over the last week. So 54 the African bloc, which includes 54 countries on the council, has urged an immediate debate on human rights and racism and police brutality in the United States. So earlier this week, I think it was Wednesday, there was a debate within the United Nations Human Rights Council. This is something that the current administration has said, we're not going to particularly, regardless of the resolution, we're going to ignore the resolution, right? But why is this particularly important? So particularly this is important is that the human rights notions or aspects of the United States is being recognized, it is being noticed, and this is important. We've had this issue, we've seen several Black activists and organizations go before the UN also, several UN treaty bodies, and particularly talk about some of these key issues. So we had this after Ferguson, so they're having the same discussion again.